Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We will kick off the session today. Hopefully, we're going to give you some helpful hints and information around, as the title says, growing your small business in federal contracting. So we'll just start off with some very quick introductions of our panel today. As Eric said, Diane Perel, the president of Gap Solutions. Relevant to the conversation today, Gap Solutions, when I first joined the company, was a very small business, about 15 employees, founded by a husband and wife in the 8A, which is the minority-owned small business program. And we have grown through 2 acquisitions, currently owned by a very large private equity company, and close to about $100 million organization. So certainly been through all the trials and tribulations of growing through a small business in this industry. Amy?
I'm Amy Wright. I'm the CEO of Macro Solutions, and I'm the co-founder. We've been at this for about 22 years. And like Diane is talking about, we've grown from one person to many people, and we're no longer a small business. So we've been through all the different cycles of federal government contracting and what that means. I'm looking forward to actually talking to you guys about that.
Great. Hamid?
My name is Hamid Moinaman. I actually started in CIRSO at UVA, believe it or not, in '94, and it was sort of a part-time thing during the summers and a little bit during the year. And I finished my undergrad, stayed to get my master's, and in '98 we went full-time. We actually started in the commercial side, and we transitioned to the government around like '03, '04-ish, around then. So again, it started with me part-time, and now we're about 500 people, give or take, about 350 employees and 150 subcontractors. And we're small on some contract vehicles, depending on size standard, and large on others. So I'd be happy to share the full gamut as I've lived through all of it.
Great, thank you. And Donald?
Hi, Donald Thomas, lead the federal business at Ad Hoc, class of '96, econ major from UVA. We're about the same size as Hamid's company, started about 7 years ago. I've only been here about a year. I've worked for several different types of firms in the government space. So large businesses like Ernst & Young and Dell, a couple of mid-sized firms that were acquired. So been through the M&A process on both sides of it a couple of times, a couple of really tiny firms that were just starting out. And prior to joining Ad Hoc about a year ago, I led a SaaS business at Bloomberg that provided market and competitive intelligence product to government contractors. So had thousands of clients across the government contracting landscape. So hopefully can provide some value to the panel today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So I thought we would start today's conversation just with the overall aspects and your early strategies around kind of getting your name out there. There's plenty of information on how to, tactically start a business, but working in the federal government industry can be a little bit daunting to navigate. So maybe just talk a little bit about, what types of actions and strategies and networking events you really found to be useful in your first couple of years, to, like I said, kind of get your name out there and establish yourself as a business in this market. Amy, did you want to start with that one?
Sure. I would say the biggest strategy is to meet as many people as you possibly can, because you're going to need a network. Organizations like ACT-IAC, APCIA, for us, because we were in enterprise solutions, AGA was a big conference we went to. There are other agency conferences, small business coordinators within agencies, and also small business coordinators with your prime contractors. Meeting those folks helps you to leverage yourself and get your network out there and get on teams and grow your business from the start.
Great. Wonderful. And Donald, Hamid, anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with Amy's answer, and the town is a lot smaller than you'd think, even though it's, the government's dispersing so much money out there. The other thing I would say is, once you've started to build that network, really try to find, somebody who's at a larger company that you can sub to, or directly to the government and build a deeper relationship so that you can really have some meaningful conversations. Everywhere I've been where it's been a small company, we've worked with former clients or former partners, and that's opened the door to get those conversations going.
Great.
So just echoing what everybody else said, I think at the early stages, it's just like whatever you can do. I mean, however many hours you're in a day, you go to as many things as you can. And I think over time, you find out what works for you and what doesn't work for us. We found out what worked for us and what didn't work for us. And, you know, what type of relationship. I think everyone said this, but really the key is building relationships. I think the question was phrased, how you get your name out there. And, you know, we really didn't try to get our name out there. We got out there trying to network and get to know people. This world is so big in the government contracting that there's no way you can get a brand out there at being a tiny company. But what you can do is build relationships with either primes or customers or teammates or whatever, and, you know, position yourselves on specific deals. But a lot of the FCAs, IAC, the customer specific events, I mean, it's been a little limited recently, but, you know, pre-COVID, there were, you know, you could do this all day long if you wanted to. So many events to go to.
That's great. And Hamid, you have an interesting perspective too, since you started in such a, you know, early stage, right after or even during, you know, being in school still. You know, there are a lot of folks who start their small businesses a little bit later in their career. And to your point, you know, you can utilize those relationships that you've built, you know, over 10 years, 20 years to, you know, as a foundation for starting your new business. You know, one of the things that you talked about, all three of you talked about, was, you know, looking for subcontract opportunities. And, you know, many of the large primes are obviously very actively looking for small businesses as partners, you know, to meet their small business goals on certain opportunities. You know, one thing that we found useful, I mentioned that our firm was founded as an 8A minority-owned firm, is utilizing the Small Business Administration, you know, small business designations, where they have, you know, various designation programs. You know, to the panel, any recommendations or thoughts around, you know, how new small businesses should look at, you know, securing those designations, the timing of them, what's required for them?
I would say that should be secondary to trying to win some work and get established. Once you do that, there's a million different types of programs with very stringent, like you mentioned, 8A is a lot harder to get than HubZone or woman-owned small business. But I think the most important thing is establishing some presence before you chase designations.
You know, I would add to that in that when you start your business, you're really just trying to get past performances. And some of these designations have a timestamp. So like the 8A, I think it's 9 years you can participate. So you want to make hay while you have that certification. And if you have no past performance when you get it, it's going to be hard to do that. So the best thing to do is to partner, get some experience, get some past performance, and then get the designation, and then you're off to the races.
Great advice.
Yeah,
Yes.
I completely agree with that. I mean, when we got our 8A, and I remember everybody was like, said exactly the same thing to me, but I was, you know, too young and dumb, I guess, to listen. So I was like, oh no, we got to get it immediately. And, you know, looking back, I wish we got it like 3 or 4 years later, because it does have a 9-year time limit on it. And it doesn't matter how successful or unsuccessful you are, these 9 years go by real quick.
Mm-hmm. There was a question in the chat, and I know Eric said we would reserve some for later, but, you know, going back to the conversation about networking, someone is asking about networking when you're outside of the DMV area. You know, I'll let some of the panelists here chime in. You know, in the federal contracting business, we all know there's certain pockets of locations where there's a significant, you know, presence, whether it's, you know, certain DOD areas, you know, Huntsville, Alabama is a significant one, you know, public health and DOD in the Atlanta area, et cetera. You know, I think any advice for folks who are looking for, you know, networking opportunities outside of the DMV area, places to look to research? Anyone have any suggestions for that?
I can take that. So I'll be just perfectly blunt. The best networking is outside of the DMV area. So I did a lot of stuff locally, but it is just so many people here. And so it's so congested that you're much better off going into different areas. And a great advice I got from some mentors about maybe 10, 15 years ago was, we had a strategic plan. We're like, hey, we're going to focus customers in this area. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, we live here. And they're like, well, get a plane ticket. So, or get a frequent flyer program. So we did, and I did. I traveled all over the country, and there's just significantly more opportunities. You touched on Huntsville, if you're doing Army missile defense, Montgomery, Alabama. There's a lot of Air Force stuff there. Dayton, Ohio, San Antonio, Texas. If you want to focus on the Navy, you got the coast, you got San Diego and you've got Charleston. So, there's tons of stuff to do and tons of events. And if you don't know where to start, AFCEA is a great starting point because they are a national organization and they have chapters in all these areas. You can spend a couple hours on their website and kind of figure out what the big chapters are. And the odds are, if it's a big chapter, that means there's probably a good government presence in that area. But me personally, and by the way, in addition to that, a lot of customers have annual conferences those to me are even better to go to than some of these networking events. For example, Defense Health, they have their DHITS program in Orlando. If you want to do business with Defense Health, that's a great place to go. The Air Force has their Air Force IT conference in Montgomery, Alabama. If you want to do business Air Force, you have to go to that. So you can go find a lot of these stuff out. And the great news is they're all public. I mean, they're all being advertised and they're all over the place. So you can, with some Googling, you can find them.
Great advice, Hamid. Switching gears just quickly around contracts and your strategy around securing contracts. Obviously winning the first contract is always exciting and a big moment, but I think, Donald, you talked a little bit about this when you were talking about the designations and having that strategic plan around the types of contracts that you want to pursue. In terms of the strategy in the first 5 years, Hamid or Amy, what was your strategy around, looking at prime versus sub, small business versus full and open? What was your strategy around that? Aside from just, like you said, getting your name out there and
getting any work that you possibly
getting any work that you can, right?
I'll take that. So I would say that in the beginning, we focused on subcontract work because we really didn't have the past performance to prime something. You want to get as much experience as you can, and you really want to pick some areas that you're going to focus on and, be good at. And then you want to focus on getting that experience in those areas from a past performance perspective and choosing your partners that have the same focus as you have. And then when you start to prime, you're going to need to, respond to small business set-asides because of your size status. With the idea, though, that keep in mind, as you grow, you're going to grow out of this program. And you really need to start thinking about how can I compete effectively, full and open, in any opportunity you have that you think that, hey, this is a great one. I've got past performance in this area. I can compete on this. It's not that big. Maybe it's a 5 or 10 person deal, something small as a prime, but that's full and open. Go ahead and dip your toe in the water, because at some point you're going to have to compete. And the worst case scenario is you become a large and you haven't figured out how to compete in a large business arena. So along the way, you want to leverage your small business, set aside opportunities to get that experience and that past performance. But then you want to start thinking always, hey, what's next? Because I could be large and I need to be able to compete.
Great advice.
So we had a slightly different experience just because of how our company grew up. So when I started, my dream wasn't to be a government contractor, just to be honest, So we actually started doing sort of .coms and, this was the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, the internet was just starting. back then. So it was a very different environment than what it is today. So we were in commercial for a while and kind of got into the federal space. So, we were probably 20 people, 25 people, somewhere like that when we started looking at federal, and it took us a couple of years to get our first, prime contract. But our strategy was basically use the commercial side to fund the federal side. And that could be analogous to Amy subcontracting, but, I'm just trying to think back. I think in 2008, we actually sold the commercial group off to another company. And it wasn't very big. It was like $500,000 a year type of revenue, but it was just a very different business. The accounting worked different, the sales worked different, and it was just not enough hours a day to do both at our size. So we just wanted to focus, and we, won some contracts there. We're probably like 40 people-ish, something like that. But our main focus was getting small, tiny prime contracts. And that's how you build your past performance. We weren't as lucky as getting subcontract opportunities. And I was actually very frustrated in a lot of cases because, I would do all the homework and all this, and I would give it to the prime, and, they would either ignore me or, yeah, whatever, kid, let me just go on. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to bid this stuff myself and win it. And we did. I mean, we've won, I don't know, probably $700-800 million of prime contracts over the last 10 years. But in an ideal case, I do 80% prime, 20% sub. But, you got to take what's out there. So if you got great sub opportunities, obviously don't turn them away. But we generally don't chase subcontracts. If they come to us, we take it. We chase prime contracts. And a lot of times you chase a prime contract, and there's another prime contractor chasing that same work, and they hear our name, and they go, hey, we want to team with these guys because they know this customer and they know this technology well. So that's how a lot of our subcontracts have formed. But calling these primes and being like, hey, can be added to your team, that never worked for us. Right. And we just don't do that. And when people do that to us, it's just a real turnoff.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add to that for folks that are trying to get prime work and you're newer to this, it's a lot different than in the commercial space. You have to pitch the customer, the program manager, whatever their title is in the government space. And then you also have the next thing they'll say after they say, oh, this sounds great. How do I get to you? Right. So you have to be able to answer that. And it's usually they're working with a contracting shop, and it's a whole separate process. Sometimes they're aligned, sometimes they're not. And so you have to start thinking about things like GSA schedules or other GWACs to get work on or to get access to, so that they can get to you and make it as easy as possible, especially if you don't have a designation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And that was one of the questions I wanted to touch on there, Donald, which is, securing contract vehicles. You use the phrase they need to be able to get to you. It's not as easy as walking in the door and they hand you money and, there you go. There's oftentimes, a lot of rules and regulations around what types of contracts that particular agency is allowed to use. And maybe just touch a little bit on the strategy of using GSA schedules. You talked about GWACs, there's large ones like, the Oasises of the world, but then also agency specific BPAs and IDIQs, which in our experience was a great way to start expanding your world into the full and open market. Because, it's task order based competition where you can compete a little bit more against the big guys. But maybe just kind of give a little bit of thoughts and ideas around the strategy behind what to look at and when around GSA schedules and IDIQs and BPAs.
I would just say, a couple things. One is it's very easy to see if you're working at the Air Force, since that came up earlier, where do they spend money? What vehicles do they use? It's very easy. It's public information. You can see where they're spending the money. And then you can have a conversation with your program folks and hopefully build a relationship with the contracting office to say, okay, you guys are really comfortable with Alliant, then I need to figure out how to get to that. Or you have your own GWACs or IDIQs internally. Great. How do I get on that? The other thing, I would say is my experience in getting GSA schedules is hire a consultant. They can get you through it a lot faster. It's going to cost you some money, but it's worth it. And then the last thing I would say is, since we brought up designations earlier, I helped a really small company, get HubZone status. I was the one who had to manage that process. It took a long time. We get it. It was a high-end strategy firm. We're doing Lean Six Sigma, some pretty sophisticated stuff. And we go to talk to the contracting shop, like, oh, we thought HubZone was for like lawn mowing and maintenance services and all these things like that. They had no concept that you could use it for the type of work we were doing. And so once we got it, it took us forever to convince them that it was allowed. And so that's the other thing you should do your due diligence on, is lesson learned, is what are they comfortable with? Just because they have access to a HubZone program or some vehicle, it doesn't mean they're going to use it. And it doesn't mean that they're going to be forced to use an agency vehicle. Like at VA, they use T4 first. You have to justify not using it, right? And the rule of two with SDVOSBs, et cetera. So understanding how they go through the contracting process to decide where it's going to go is really important as well if you're trying to get a prime spot.
You know, that's very true. And I can't stress enough that, you know, you have to collect IDIQ and GWAG vehicles and certifications along the way in order to compete effectively in the federal space. And without them, you could find yourself wanting to go after a certain contract, and you just can't because you don't have that vehicle. And then you're forced to sub to somebody just to be able to compete on that deal. And so to Hamid's point, you want to be able to prime. So you really need to actually respond to these IDIQs and GWACs. And it's hard because you have to actually spend the time to win the vehicle. And that's not real work. I mean, the work's going to come later. So there's a really long time frame, and it can seem a little bit frustrating from that perspective. But you really have to just, as part of your strategy, you know, you're going after work that you can prime right now, and then you need to constantly be thinking in terms of, you know, responding and trying to get on these GWACs and IDIQs, and specifically agencies that you're targeting. It doesn't have to be, you know, every IDIQ or GWAC, but take a look at what you're targeting and you know, see what vehicles they use and go after those accordingly.
Hamid, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what stage you're in your company. So I just kind of use, you know, maybe the number of FTEs, right? So if you're a 10-person company, you should get your Schedule 70, and I totally agree. You got to get a consultant to do it. That's what we did. And it's the best thing ever. It's like maybe $10,000 to do it, or maybe a little more, but you know, it's not millions. So, you know, everybody should have a 70. And then there's a couple of things that are like layups, like Seaport Next Gen. You should get those because you just got to fill out a form, right? So those are like the no-brainers. Everybody should have those. Then after that, if I was a 15-person company, I'd just stop right there. You got to win some work. You know, you got to get to about like 50 to 100 people before you can really start focusing on other stuff. And I remember I had an advisor who still advises me. And, you know, when I was like, I don't know, 20 people, I was talking to him. He's like, well, yeah, you're 100 people. You really don't have that many chips to move around, so to speak, right? So there's only so much you can do. You know, you can't say I'm going to invest in this or start that group. It's just, what are you going to do with your time, right? So, and I think Donald may have said this, your time needs to be winning work. Well, however shape or way or form that comes into. Once you get a little bigger, then you got to pick the vehicles you have to go to. So there are two buckets. So there's the GWACs. The G is like government wide. That's the GW. So that's like everybody in the government can use those. And those, I think, you know, they're almost a must if you get over a certain size. So CIOSP3, that's an NIH vehicle. That's a big one. Oh, let me back up. So it depends on what services you're providing, right? So if you're like in the product selling business, you want to have NASA SOUP. It's like SEWP, right? We don't sell products, so we don't touch NASA SOUP, right? If you do services, CIOSP3, Alliance, you know, there's a handful of them out there. So you get those general government-wide ones. And then you have the agency ones. So if you're doing Army work, you need to get on ITES. ITES 3S is the new version, that 2S and ITES, I guess 1S, I don't know if it's 1S, just ITES before. So there's, you know, different iterations of these things. But you also have to remember that It's a lot of money to win these things, but then there's also money to maintain them, right? So you have all these government reports you have to do, you have teams, you have to have team meetings. A lot of them have all these compliance requirements that you got to live for. So, it's kind of like, to some extent, it's like buying a car. Maybe not the best example, but there's a cost of buying it, but then you have all this maintenance cost of fuel and tires and oil changes and all that stuff that goes along with it. So these IDIQs, if you got 30 of them, it's like now you got 30 cars, you have 30 insurance payments, you've got 30 everything to manage. So more is not necessarily better. Our strategy was always, or not always, the last decade has been, DoD and DHS. So vehicles there we focus on. If there's a vehicle that's in another agency, that's not a GWAC, that's not general. I mean, it's got to be really compelling for us to look at it. But usually we pass on a lot of those. So, it's got to kind of fit in what your target market is and start from there. And, the sad reality is I'm just picking on Army, but if you're bidding on Army work, and that's your business, and this vehicle comes out, the new version of ITES, and you bid it and you don't win, you might need to shut down your Army division because you ain't going to win any more prime work if that's a mandated vehicle. And you may need to start going somewhere else. And the reverse of that is true as well. So, you could win a vehicle with an agency you have no business with, and then 4 years later, because you invested a lot into that, you might be half your business is in that vehicle.
Yeah. No, those are great points. And I think just, to recap a couple of things when it comes to the vehicles that I heard from everyone is number one, focus, right? It's, where are you going to be doing business? What type of services, are you going to be selling to the government, and focus on those contract vehicles? Something else that I will add that was helpful for us is as we were sort of teetering between small business and large business, we looked at vehicles that had 2 tracks. Right. So there's the small business track, but then there's the large business track. And so you win it first as a small, but it's a really easy jump to then when it comes up for recompete to compete in the full and open large business market, because you already have that past performance on the vehicle, doing the work with that customer. And, it really kind of helps you transition into that large business market. So we had several instances where that was a strategy for us at agency specifics. So, you talked about, and you're right, that it's a lot of work and a lot of money to maintain all these contracts, all these vehicles. And, one of the most important things when you're building a small business is when to invest in the business. Since we're talking about, specifically around the BD process right now, maybe we can start there around, when do you hire BD? And BD in our business means so many different things. It's the capture, it's the teaming, it's the pricing, it's the bid and proposals, it's compliance. There's graphics. There's so much that goes into it. How have you looked at investing in your BD process, both internally and then also using, like we talked about, consultants and outside resources? Amy, you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. So along the way, we've used consultants, all the way through. When it comes to business development, I think founders start in one of 2 categories. Either you're maybe the category where you were the functional or technical consultant and you have that expertise, and maybe you're billing yourself out, or, that's where your expertise lies. And then other people come at it from a different perspective. Maybe they were more on the sales side of things and they do have that business development background. So look inside yourself. You're always going to be your best business development advocate because you're the owner of your company. But beyond that, you're going to need extra help. And it's really hard when you have to invest in somebody, and especially in business development, because you don't know whether they're going to be successful or not. And so maybe dip your toe in slowly and, hire a consultant, someone that can help you out. But, I would say don't jump into infrastructure too quickly, because it's very expensive. You really need to think in terms of how you're growing and who you're adding to your back office, and that includes business development. But you also can't count on anybody to do it all for you. You're going to still have to be a big part of any business development effort.
Me.
Yeah, so I mean, I 100% agree with what Amy said is, you need to be spending your time doing BD. And if you don't like doing that, that's okay. You can learn to like it. Nobody likes it at first, right? It's really hard getting rejected all day long, right? But you either get used to it or you say, I don't want to do it. But if you don't want to do it, you should be closing your business. So it was interesting. I was talking to, again, bringing mentors in here. I've been lucky to have a handful of really good mentors, and pretty much all of them. I mean, one of them ran like a 2,000 person company. And I asked him, well, how much of your time do you spend in business development? He's like, 70 to 80%. I was like, whoa, that blew my mind to have a president of a 2,000 person company spending that time. And I was spending maybe 30% of my time. I was like, okay, that's got to change. So, it's all you to start with. You're going to be the one, the passion behind it. You're going to be setting the direction, and you're going to be able to sell your company the best. Adding people, consultants, yeah, get them as much as you can. Hiring people, yep, get them as much as you can. Spend every dollar you can into BD. The hard part is finding the right people. Right. So if there's like 10 BD people out there that were all really good, I'd go get, and I couldn't afford them, I'd go get a loan from the bank and, hire all 10 of them. But the reality is finding the right people, that's the problem. So it's really not, to us, it's not really an investment issue. It's usually finding the talent issue. And if you find somebody that's really good, hire them. And, realize that as time goes on, you're not going to be able to win all the work yourself. So you're going to need to build a team around you that is doing BD. And I think, Diane, you said this best at the beginning. BD means a lot of different things. And what I found through hiring people is there's a lot of people that are good at specific parts of the BD process, but there's very, very, very few people that are good at all of them. And the ones that are good are usually called presidents or CEOs of companies, right? So, that's maybe a way to do it. Yeah, maybe start with somebody that can do parts of the proposal for you. Maybe you start with somebody that can do some networking, kind of get you indoors, but they're not gonna be able to sell. They can just open doors. Consultants work great for that. So there's just, a lot of niche things, and then you sort of the maestro that kind of brings them all together and actually execute on it. But that's the billion-dollar question is, how to do the BD. And I think everyone in this business is trying to figure that out. And it's just really, really hard.
And I would just say that I couldn't agree more. It's really hard to let go if you're a senior leader or the owner of the company of BD, strategy, or culture. And otherwise, though, I would say the opposite is true, to at least to a point. You can absolutely outsource legal, and I would highly recommend that, especially as you're getting started. For a while, you can outsource contract management beyond the legal part of it. You can outsource finance, you can outsource lots of other things. And then eventually, as you get certain size, certain FTE or revenue, you can start to hire internally. But those other things I think are really important to keep your arms around. But we're saying about 500 people. We outsource legal. We have a CFO, so that was an early hire. We have internal BD people, but we also use consultants. So most companies have a mix. Even the big giant companies, Booz Allen's of the world, use tons of consultants for business development, even some proposal work.
No, that's a great point. And, we talked a little bit earlier about the business of or doing business with the federal government means just a couple of regulations that we have to follow, just a few. And I know, especially when you're, starting a small business, it's impossible to keep up with everything that you have to do. And Donald, you sort of referenced about, outsourcing legal and contracts and whatnot. Any other thoughts around areas of the compliance piece of the business that you would recommend, younger, smaller, new businesses to make sure is really tight, and, whether it's internal or looking at outside consultants?
I think the hardest thing to learn in government contracting is how to, as a really small company, how do I deliver and sell at a high level, and then make sure I'm compliant with the contract. because things change. And if you have not documented changes on your contract, or you have not certified your rates, it can come back to bite you over time. So I think, as a really small company, you can absolutely outsource the compliance side, but that would be one of the first hires I would hire is a good contracts person, because that also, if they're doing it right, helps you from a business development perspective. They notice things, they become tight with the customer. If they're doing it right, it can help you over time. But in the very, very beginning, I would outsource it, because unless that's your expertise and you like it, most founders are more technical or more sales oriented. I couldn't agree more with outsourcing.
Amy, Hamid, anything you want to add to that?
So I'm not sure if we're talking about the same thing, but outsourcing to me means you give up a whole function to somebody. And I mean, we tried doing that. That's failed miserably for us in the past. So we don't really quote unquote outsource. Now, what we do a lot is hire consultants to do, and I think maybe that's kind of what you were saying is, like for a long time, we hired, like for Schedule 70, we hired a company, or GSA Schedules, a company that's what they did. So we use them to do that, for this type of a compliance thing, we hired another company to do that, or to essentially consultants and help us do it. But we still have to do the grunt work. So we did one thing where we were like, oh, wow, accounting is kind of accounting. Let me just outsource that to the accounting firm, and man, that was a mistake. So, don't do that. That created so many issues. So we kept that in-house. Now, as you get bigger, you're going to go from hiring sort of a part-time person to hiring full-time people to do that. But, kind of the grand scheme of things, I think for me, if I were to start a company from scratch, I probably would use one. I didn't do this, but I probably would now, is one of these PEO companies. I forget what the new names are, but it used to be one called Administaff. I think they rebranded to something else now. But they're nice. They take care of your stuff up to 50 employees. You don't have to wear payroll and all that stuff. It lets you focus on the business. And then, once you get to 40-ish people, you can start transitioning all that in-house and get your own payroll. And I mean, we use obviously a payroll company, but someone's got to still execute it and get all that stuff set up. So the back office, I think Amy said this in the last question. It was actually really important. So make sure it's people remember it. You always want your back office to kind of be lagging behind, if you will, right? You don't invest all your money into your BD and winning work. And the back office is just, you just gotta kind of, shoestring budget type of a thing, just keep stuff running. Obviously you want to make sure everything's being done, people are getting paid, you're able to invoice, all that stuff. But, it's going to be on significantly less investment. I kind of jokingly say it's like the opposite of build it and it will come, right? You want the work to come and then you build your back office to support it. And we've made that mistake. It's pretty painful, I'll tell you. So don't do that.
Yeah, I think the pacing of when to hire is one of the more difficult decisions for a small business, owner or leader to really make, because to your point, you're always trying to run lean. And so you don't want to staff up too much, but if you're bidding larger as you grow and you start bidding larger scale contracts and you look at transitioning 100 people, 200 people, that's when you have to start really thinking about, can the back office handle it or not? But that is, I agree. I think outside resources and consultants and, law firms, et cetera, are a great way to just kind of augment a lean staff in the early days.
We used like a lot of, I don't say part-time people, but just consultants, like individuals, not really companies. Maybe like 3-4 people in a small company to do schedule management or help with price compliance, pricing aspect of something. Those stuff work really well. I mean, law, that's like a whole nother animal. So that's like, if you're doing bid protests, we can spend 2 hours talking about that.
That's
but-
another seminar.
Yeah, that's a very long one and painful one.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add there too is that, like Hamid was saying, he has an advisor, someone that he trusts. We had someone that's been there all the way through, and this person helped us at every step to look outside and look at our organization and say, what is that next hire? And really look at what everyone's doing and how their time is being spent effectively and what they need to be doing. And so you don't want to spend any money where you don't have to, like Hamid was saying. You want to keep that on a shoestring budget as much as you possibly can. But at some point you'll know it. You need a full-time person to do that, and you need them to be internal, and then you make those decisions. But it's helpful sometimes to have someone you work with that you trust to have those conversations with, so that you're not the only one having to make that decision.
Great.
So,
And I know sorry, go ahead.
let me just kind of add something to this. And now this was us in the commercial world when we're at this size, but to me, these were kind of the stages that I remember. We were, I think, around 8 or 9 people, and I was billing 40 hours a week, more than sometimes 50 hours a week. And I'm coming on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, work, 8, 10 hours each day to do all the back office stuff. And at some point, my team was like, all right, dude, get out of here, go win business. We can deliver better than you. So get out of here. So the first step was getting me out of doing billable work, right? And that worked, for me, that worked. And then I think our next hire was sort of like a back office admin type, somebody to kind of just do basic HR, basic bookkeeping. They're not doing payroll, anything complicated, but they're just doing basic stuff. And I think we did that when we're like 14, 15 people-ish, something like that. And then it just kind of went from there. But even at like 20 people, our back office was like 3, 4 people. I think the person, and this sort of just philosophically speaking, the person is more important than the role. So like if you've got a great contracts person, but you're like, well, my next hire needs to be in accounting, scratch that, hire that person, because a known quantity is, worth more than trying to stick to that plan of, hey, I need this or that. If you don't, then, you want to hire for that need. Kind of like I don't know if you guys are football players, but in the draft, an NFL draft, they call them best athlete available, right? So that's kind of the mentality you want, is if you got a couple openings, or you've got one opening, but, could be a contracts, it could be a BD, you want to hire them no matter what. But back office, if it's accounting or this, you hire the best person that you know, and kind of go from there.
That's great advice, Hamid, and very true, because, we always say it's more about the person than the position. Better to hire good people. I know we're running up against time. There was one other quick area that I thought, for small businesses, especially in this market, could benefit from, which is just the initial stages of financing. Not to get into the tactical aspects of it, but just, something to keep in mind around this particular business. In our experience, and the other panelists might have a different experience, but, there are a lot of opportunities to bill quicker and get paid quicker, when you're a small business, but they don't always work. And the federal government likes to overcomplicate everything, including how they pay you. And so you are oftentimes, 30, 60, even 90 days, in arrears from being paid for the work that you're doing. And so, financing is incredibly important for not only payroll purposes, but also, as you start bidding deals, having to show that line of credit and financial, solvency to the government, so that they can entrust this small business with, this procurement. Any thoughts or advice that you have? Amy, I think you had touched on this a bit when we were preparing, in your early stages around just, how to think about financing and how to go about that in the early years.
And obviously it depends on where you are personally, financially.
Yes.
Everyone has a different situation, but what I would say is you really need a line of credit right out of the gate. You can't wait to get the line of credit because like you're describing, you could be 30, 60, 90 days out. In one case, we had a client and we were very, very early stage that didn't pay us for 9 months.
Mhm.
And then we got paid all the 9 months, but we had to carry that. We had folks working on that contract. So we went to a small bank. Practically speaking, we thought that was a bank that worked with us better, just where we were in our stage as a company. As time has gone on, we've worked with bigger and bigger banks because our needs have grown, and some small banks can't meet those. But in the beginning, working with a small community bank was really great for us. We got a line of credit established. One of the things they made me do was I had to put up my house as collateral. I owned a home, and that's one of those things you don't think about as a founder. They may make you do. They may not make you do that, but they might. And it depends on also how much work you have already. So like in Hamid's case, he had started his company early on, and maybe he had 20 people, and maybe you had a line of credit from the get-go as well. But in the very beginning, you only have you. And so the goal I had was to get my house off that line of credit, which took me a couple of years, and I did, but it had to be based in solely on your business. But you need a very solid relationship with the bank. I cannot stress that enough, because there are times you may have to go and say, hey, we won this deal. Our line of credit's only at X, but we need more credit. We need it fast. And you need to have a relationship where they're willing to give you more credit. So it's something that you need to look at right out of the gate.
Agreed. And there's always that bid where you have to submit the letter of the line of credit, and nobody tells you about that until 24 hours before it's due. So that relationship is very critical. I mean, Donald, anything else you wanted to add to that?
These guys have more experience with this than I do. I would just mention that there are banks, definitely in DC Metro, that specialize in government contracting as customers. And so they understand how the whole process works and why the line of credit is so important. And then last thing I'll say is when I was at a really small company, we did about half of our business, we had negotiated early payment terms, either with our prime or with the government. So we asked the question every time, can we get paid net 30 instead of net 60? Can we get paid at the beginning of the month instead of the end? Whatever we took a position every time, and it worked about half the time, but it helped with the cash flow for sure.
Yep. And there's a question about, do you bill the government for the interest accrued on the 90-day carry check? There are regulations around the government being required to pay you interest. The problem is like Amy said, when you're waiting for 9 months to get paid, that interest is lovely when you finally get paid. But in the meantime, you are carrying that payroll and all the expenses around the business. But yes, there are rules around the government having to pay interest on delayed payments.
And those interests aren't exactly generous. They're like bottom of the barrel type of a thing, and you get it, and it just ends up being a rounding error.
Yeah.
Here's $30 for those $3 million we helped.
That's right.
Well, and also as a subcontractor, you almost can never negotiate that kind of a term. So you have to think that you're not going to get interest.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is just an interesting one. So like, we had one where they owed us like $2 million or something like that. And this is, much later in life. And it'd been like 9 months. And what had happened was the government had reorganized. So nobody had access to this code, which all the billing was going into. So then our 9 months, the only way to do it is somebody went in and rejected every vendor's invoice, and we had to resubmit them. So guess what? Our 9-month clock started again. So for those 9 months, we didn't get any interest. So, there's a lot of stuff. And, what are you going to do? Argue with the government? We were focused on getting our $2 million, not the $1,000 interest. So, it's just kind of like, it looks great on paper, but in reality, it doesn't really work. So, but I want to answer the previous question because it's really important. And I think Amy brought this up. It's where you are in life. So when I started, one of the reasons I started my company is I had nothing. Literally, I had like $400, if that. And I was like, all right, well, I start with nothing. And if I end up with nothing, that's cool. I can live with that. At least I give it a shot. I tell you, I could not start a company right now, having a family, a wife and kids and all that. It's just a different thing for me. If I, were a similar financial position I was earlier. So, I could afford to take risk. So what I did is, I built myself out, and every dollar I made, I put it back in the company. I lived off of, I don't know, like $10,000, $12,000 a year, like very minimal. I actually stayed with my parents for housing. So I didn't even have rent for like, a year and a half or 2 years. And then, I got super cheap rent, just personal decisions just to make the business work. But I literally put every dollar I had into that business. I did get a line of credit. I didn't really know any better. I started going to these banks, not knowing what was what. And, I just kept going on bank after bank. And then there was this tiny bank, Central Fidelity, which has been bought 5 times over now. And, they gave me a $10,000 line of credit. This is maybe 2 years into business. I was still probably at UVA when I got that line of credit, but, I paid it off and only use it when I needed it to, and, this and that. And then, 20 or 10 became 20, 20 became 50, and then it got millions of line of credit now. But, it's just never too early to start that line of credit. You always want to grow it. And right now we have a much bigger line that we need, but, you just never know. You win one big contract, all of a sudden you need $5 million to, support payroll for 2 months, 3 months, or, somebody's system in the government breaks down and they don't pay you. So, you always want to get your line to be close as maximum as the bank feels comfortable lending to you.
And there's a question that came in that says, how much cash in hand do you recommend? How many months of payroll would you recommend? How many, 6 months, 12 months? I mean, in our experience, there are occasions, we had at one point, our largest customer was almost a year in arrears and owed us $3.5 million. So, I think it really depends on the payment behaviors of the customers that you have. And so it's hard to, at least from my personal experience, it's hard to say, oh, there's an exact formula to that, because some customers pay very quickly. And so maybe you only need a couple of months, but.
Yeah, I kind of remember back in the day, our goal was like 3 months.
Yeah.
To have like 3 months, all expenses. So if we didn't get $1, we'd be good. But it's not just cash on hand, right? So yeah, you have a line of credit. If you're lucky enough to own a home, you could take a home equity loan on your line of credit. That's the other thing I did. When I bought my house, I took a line of credit on my house just in case I needed the money. And, I could write like $100K from that to meet the business. I never did, but there's stuff you do that you can access cash quickly, which is not the same thing as having sort of quote unquote money in the bank.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a better way of doing it than that, because the other thing, I guess, is it's not like you're borrowing money to invest in something that if it doesn't pan out, you got to pay it. You're taking money to pay your employees and all that, and really your delay is waiting for the government to pay you back.
Right.
So it's relatively safe.
Yeah, I would say that it's not as risky in the government space as it is maybe in the commercial space, because they have to pay you if you've done the job. So it may be delayed, like Hamid saying, but eventually you'll get your money. So having access to lines of credit or other cash, like on your house or something like that in the beginning, is important, just so that you can pay people.
Yeah. And Donald said this, in the beginning of this topic, which is there are banks that are very familiar with this industry, government, in the government contracting industry. And, there were some banks for a time that they were not interested in investing in this industry. And so it is important to find those banks. And as I still, have relationships with bankers with them for 15 years, and we may not be banking with them, but, good people to know. And you do want to maintain that network, and all of the things that we talked about in the beginning around these networking events. It's not just to meet partners, it's also to meet the bankers and the attorneys and the accountants and, all of the resources and consultants, et cetera, that you need, to run the business. So I think that's another aspect that, I think is important from the early days of networking as well.
Yeah, let me just add to that. I think that's important. Not all banks understand government contracting, and it's like a whole different type of business, right? So, banks, like some may specialize in real estate or whatever. So you want to work with a bank that understands federal contracting and We had one that did, and then they got bought by like Wachovia or one of those big banks, and then they didn't. So, we ended up switching banks. I think that's really important.
Yeah. So Eric, I know we are up against our hour. There were a couple of questions in the chat that we did not get a chance to hit upon. Would you like us to go back to those, or just open up for any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I think we could hit one. We've got about 3 minutes left, and it was mentioned a couple of times. I'm glad it came up. And Tony, he asked, can you expand on the importance of past performance? And then kind of the second part is what's important to achieve.
Sure. I'll make one comment, and then if maybe Donald, because I know you had a business around looking at opportunities and how to target those opportunities, but it's all about the past performance. If you can't claim that you have done something, the government doesn't necessarily want to talk with you, and neither do the primes. When you go to partner with a company, it's always, what can you bring to this opportunity? Fill out the meatball chart, and what have you done in the past to justify that you are qualified to do this work? Donald, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Couple other things, it needs to be relatively recent. Usually it's 3 to 5 years in the past. It can't be something you did 15 years ago, typically. The way I always think about it is the government wants to get the best solution they can for the lowest price with the lowest amount of risk. And one of the ways they assess that risk is, have you done it? Have you done something that's relatively similar in size, scope, time horizon with my agency, hopefully? So the more relevant, the more that you can get kind of to the center of that bullseye, as many of those as you can get is gonna be what gets you over the top from a past performance perspective.
And it's also a formal requirement for RFP responses. So just keep that in mind, that they'll say, we need 3 past performances. And you actually have to go back to your customers and get them to fill out, in some cases, a past performance questionnaire. So it's not just about telling your story of what you've done. They're actual past performance references that are required. And so you need to think in terms of that. And where you can't meet all 3 past performance requirements, that's where you work with partners and bring them into the particular procurement and lean on them maybe for a past performance or 2.
Yeah, so agree with everything everyone's saying. So in case, I hope everybody knows this, but your past performance is essentially your resume, right? So it's the work that you've done, what type of work it is, what size it is, and also how well you did it. So, if use an analogy, if you were building you needed a shed and you're looking for shed builders, you want somebody that has experience building a shed, right? If you're building a house, you want to hire people that have experience building houses. If you're building a skyscraper, you want to hire people that have experience building skyscrapers. So, if you don't have any experience building skyscrapers or submarines, you probably shouldn't be bidding work that involves that. Right. So what we've done is we've kind of gradually moved up. So we kind of start with a shed, and then build a townhome, and then kind of evolve into the next thing and the next thing and next thing before you get there. So that's sort of how you try to build your resume up. I think you can always go a little more than what you've done, but you can't go from a shed to a skyscraper. That's just, no one's going to believe you, and they're going to laugh. The government's going to laugh at you and throw your RFP out as being, they're high risk, I think, as Donald said it. So you want to consciously build that, and that fits into your business strategy. If you're bidding DoD work, you want to make sure your work and past performance is DoD and security. So that's kind of like, it goes into your overall business strategy.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and also a special thank you to you, Amy, Diane, Donald, and Hamid. Really appreciate the time. Thank you for your insight on just what you're seeing out there in your businesses, and also within the business of government.